By far, the number one thing that has helped me build and finish large complex projects is just having a whiteboard that I can plan things out on. You don't need one nearly this big. I even have a smaller one that I write down things on all the time, and you don't even need a whiteboard to do this. But understanding how you can use things like a whiteboard or a text document to do really rough planning for a project is going to help you become more successful in actually finishing and building these projects. And in this video, I'm going to share with you all the tips and tricks I have on how you can use these techniques to actually convert and finish projects, which can hopefully earn you some income on the side. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. And at least for me, one of the things that really becomes difficult with building projects, especially larger projects, is after you get a few hours or a few days or even a few weeks into the project, you're eventually going to become a little bit overwhelmed with what you're building because you're going to run into roadblocks or things you didn't plan out or think about in the beginning. Especially if you really didn't do much planning, you're going to hit these roadblocks even sooner. And the sooner you hit these roadblocks, the more discouraging it is. Because let's say you have this grand idea for this really cool project that you thought about in like 10 minutes. You're like, wow, this sounds amazing. I'm going to start coding it right away. You start coding it and you realize, you know what? This actually doesn't work very well in Next.js because it requires me to do like WebSocket connections or something like that, which Next.js doesn't really support natively. Or maybe you just realize, hey, I didn't think about this particular edge case and it's going to be really difficult to solve and I don't really want to go through and think about that right now. This is an incredibly common problem. I run into it, I'm sure you've run into it, and it makes building these projects difficult because you just give up when you run into these roadblocks because you're so early on in the project. I've only committed like an hour to this project. I'm just going to give up because I hit something that was difficult. I'm going to go do an easier project. And then you do the same thing with another project. You quit after a few hours or days, and you just repeat this forever until you have 100 half-built projects. This is why it is so crucial to do your planning before you build out your project. And one of the best things that I like to do for planning is I like to write down what my general database diagram is going to look like. It doesn't have to be comprehensive or complete. It just needs to be a general idea of, okay, I have this idea for a project. How am I going to store this data and how am I going to relate this data to one another? So if we just go ahead and take this whiteboard essentially as an example, it's not super easy to read, but honestly, that part's not important at all. Essentially, you can see I have a lot of different boxes which represent my database tables, like a job listing or company table, things like that. And I have a bunch of different columns for what I think should be in there. For example, like an ID, company ID, salary, these different things. So I generally think about, okay, this particular project is for like a job board. And I'm thinking, okay, what are all the different things that a job board has inside of it? Well, it's going to have job listings. It's going to have companies that post these jobs. Each job listing is going to have certain criteria inside of it. So I'm thinking about all the different things that I need to put into this particular project. This initial step of just thinking about what my database is going to look like already gets me a long ways into the process of building my project because now I have a high level overview of all the different data structures and things that I need inside of my project. Another example is actually a project I'm currently working on. This is essentially like a parity pricing tool for different countries. So different countries can get cheaper discounts for tools based on where they live. And I have a few things on here, for example, like holiday-based discounts, country-based discounts, things like that. And it's a really basic overall diagram of what my project's going to look like. But this is not a complete overview of what the project looks like, and I completely forgot multiple things, especially with this parity deals one. As I'm building out, I realized I forgot to include things for like subscriptions for people being able to sign up for the product and like coupons and products and stuff like that. There was a lot of stuff that I forgot when I built out this diagram, but that's okay because having this diagram in place gives you a roadmap at least for the initial days of your project. Depends on how long you spend planning, but you'll at least have a couple days or maybe even a couple weeks of roadmap laid out with this particular diagram. This means you at least have a starting place where you can say, okay, I'm going to go into this project and start working on X, Y, and Z. And once you cross those off your list, you then go back to your diagram and you say, okay, now I can work on A, B, and C on this diagram. And you can continually build out like that. Another thing that I really like to do on top of building out these database style diagrams is I like to write down all the different pages that my users are going to do and interact with inside my website. Now, I don't have an example of this written down, but a recent project that I just built, which is a Calendly style clone where people can go ahead onto a calendar and, subscribe to different events with you and just add themselves to your calendar. This has lots of different pages that you need to be able to interact with. And there's like two different types of users. There's the person creating the calendar and there's the person interacting with the calendar. So I created a list of all the different pages that each of these different user types are going to interact with. So for the person interacting with the calendar, they have like a booking page that they can add their name and choose the day. While the person creating a calendar can create a calendar, they can add the availabilities and things that they have, and they can view different events and so on. So I wrote down all the different possible pages, as well as a general overview of what I think the data is going to look like in my project and how it all connects. And that alone gave me probably 75% of all of the structure I needed for my entire application. Now, there's plenty of things I didn't think about, things that I changed from my original diagram, pages I removed, pages I added, but that initial 75% of the work made it so that I had a roadmap I could constantly follow. And the best part is when I got to a sticking point where I was like, I don't really know what to do, I'm kind of stuck, I already had a large chunk of the project built. And a lot of times I could look at that list and say, okay, I don't know how to do problem A, but I'm gonna go ahead and move on to problem B right now, work on that, I think I know what to do, and then I can come back to problem A. Maybe I realize that I don't even need whatever this problem A was solving, or maybe now that I've solved problem B, I have a better idea of how I'm going to solve problem A. Another great thing about this whiteboarding style approach is it helps you figure out what tech stack you want to use for your project. It's really easy to default to whatever your normal tech stack you use is. Maybe it's Next.js, React, Angular, Laravel, it doesn't really matter, whatever it is, you just default to that tech stack. But depending on the project you're building, it may be better to choose a specific language or framework that specializes in that particular thing. For example, if you have a project that needs to do a lot of lower level, high performance optimizations and performance calculations, choosing JavaScript as your language probably isn't the best choice. You'd maybe want to choose Rust or something like that. Well, if you want to create a web application that has a lot of good interactivity, something like React and Next.js is going to be a really good choice for that. So understanding what your project is and the different limitations and requirements for it helps you to choose that tech stack. I would just say if you're trying to build this project to actually finish the project, generally choosing a tech stack that you're familiar with is going to be a better bet than trying to optimize your tech stack to perfectly align with the particular project you're building. Another really great thing about this whiteboarding approach is if we go back to this job board example, you can see that this is a massive list of a bunch of different things, and this doesn't even include everything. And this actually made me realize that this probably isn't the best project for me to build right now because it requires so much work and there's so many moving parts that it would be a 10, 20 hour long video if I were to build everything that I wrote down. And for me, it would take, weeks or even a month to build out this entire project. So by planning out things, you can realize what the actual scope of your project is. Because usually when you have an idea for something cool, you'll think, oh, that's not that hard. I could build that in a weekend. And that's almost never actually true. It's going to take you weeks or even months to build out these projects. So writing down the different pages you need, the different database, tables you're going to have, and the different steps to create what you want to do is going to help you realize, okay, I thought I could build this in a weekend, but really it's probably going to take me 10 to 15 days to build. And if you have a realistic expectation, okay, I'm going to go in and spend 10 days on this project, it makes it much more bearable when you're on day 9 or 10 and you realize, okay, I actually accounted for these days and I know that I have that particular amount of time versus when you thought it was going to be a weekend and now you're 10 days into the project and you're 3 times over what your allocated time was. It becomes really easy to get discouraged. Now, so far, I've only shown you how to do this with a whiteboard, but all of these different skills of planning out your project, figuring out what pages and what data you have can be taken to pretty much any medium you want. You can just use a general piece of paper, you can open up a blank text document inside your computer, or you can even use a tool like a ScalaDraw, which gives you kind of the benefits of a whiteboard inside of your browser to make it a little bit easier to work with and share with other people. The one thing I would recommend avoiding though is diving into tools that are very specialized on doing one particular thing. For example, there's a lot of tools out there that help you with mapping out your database with like one-to-many and many-to-many relationships and so on, but these tools are very rigid and they require you to think very in-depth about every single piece of data that goes into your application. While these initial planning tools are more meant for figuring out the high level of how things are in general going to work, but not figuring out the minutia of every single piece of data. And using these more specialized tools are going to actually slow you down and make you want to quit the project because it makes you think through more things at the start. Instead, this planning is about getting all the information out of your head onto paper and seeing what does this project entail. Instead of trying to figure out exactly what each column data type is going to be, you just think in general, what is this column of this data going to be? Is it a string, a number, so on? I don't care if it's a varchar of 16 bytes or 82 bytes or whatever. I just want to know that this is generally a string inside my database. And honestly, if you're getting to the data level, you don't even need to know how you store the data, if it's a string or not. You could just say, okay, I want to have some user settings. I don't care what the user settings are. I don't care how they're stored. I just know the data is going to have user settings somewhere. So you really only care about the high level. That's why tools like a ScalaDraw or a blank text editor or a whiteboard are the best because they're free form and you can make any changes that you want and do whatever you want. And it doesn't force you into specific systems or confine you to specific things. Now, you may be having some pushback to this particular topic where you're thinking, well, I'm going to waste a bunch of time writing out all this stuff on a whiteboard when I could just start coding right away. And at first you may think that is true, but to be honest, the amount of time it takes to write all this out on a whiteboard, less than an hour, maybe a couple hours tops if you're working on a rather large project with a lot of moving pieces. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things when you're spending weeks, months, or even years building out a project. And the likelihood of success drastically increases if you spend just that 10, 15, 30, 60 minutes up front planning out the different things that are going to go into your application. Also, from my experience, it makes you work faster because now instead of having to build something, then plan, build something, then plan, you did all your planning up front, and now you can just do build, 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 build until your project is pretty much entirely built, and you have very little planning steps you need to do in between. This is also a much more enjoyable way to work because instead of constantly getting stuck over and over again, you just get to flow effortlessly from beginning to end with your project, and it feels amazing. And even when you get stuck, there's 5 other branches you could tackle where you can constantly be working on code and doing the thing that you enjoy, because building projects is honestly probably what you enjoy just like I do. So that's the thing you want to spend the most amount of time doing, and planning things out on a whiteboard is what actually allows you the ability to spend more time programming. And even if you think that you have enough experience that this process is actually going to be a waste of time, I assure you it's not. For me, I find that all the time when I do this additional step of planning on the whiteboard, everything goes so much smoother and I'm much less likely to quit my projects. And every time I think, oh, you know what, this is a small enough project, I don't need to do this, I always run into so many problems. It takes so much longer than I expected. And I just wish that I had spent the time originally doing it on a whiteboard, because I usually end up doing it on the whiteboard anyway after wasting a bunch of time up front. So now that you know how to actually plan out your project effectively, the next step is to choose a project. And if you're unsure of good projects to build, I have a list right over here of different projects you can build to really impress someone on a resume or portfolio. With that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.